Hey guys, how's it going? We got another tutorial here. I know it's been a while, but we're back in it. Today we're going to be doing this circular pop-out menu using GSAP, which is the GreenSock animation platform. So this is a JavaScript animation. We're not going to be doing the CSS so much. Again, we're trying to code it out. All right. So this is the example of what it's going to look like. All the icons, the circles, the colors. I already did them in Inkscape using SVG, scalar vector graphics, and then I just loaded them into the HTML file. Uh, you can do this if you're familiar with Inkscape. But what I'm just going to do is I'm going to walk you through the basic process of how this all works. All right. So let's get started. So I have this, this blank CodePen page, and we're just gonna start off by creating an SVG element in the HTML and a circle element, and I'm just going to give it an ID of the main button because this is going to be the center one. Whoops, yeah, and then following that, we're going to have another button, or sorry, all the other circles. We only need to create one right now, and we're actually just going to give it a class of circle, and we're going to go from there. The biggest thing though is before I get started with anything, I always have to set up my CSS, the basics for the body. For this, I don't want any of that default margin that usually comes, or potentially the default padding. I also want to set the height and the height of this to 100 view height, so the viewport height, and the background, because I can't stand white backgrounds, I always usually put it to gray. I'm someone that likes working in dark mode, so I don't want something that's kind of bright and too abrasive for me. Also, I want to set the display, and I'm going to set it to grid, and just so that we can center the SVG canvas, or the SVG element, in the middle of the page. So justify center and align content center. Great. Second thing that we want to do, just basic SVG styling. We want to set the height and the width of this so that we can see our workspace, our canvas. We'll go ahead and set it for 400 pixels. Usually, I would set it to 300 pixels baseline, or set it to something that is scaling, like the viewport width, just so that it's responsive and it works on everything. 300 pixels because almost every single device is a minimum of 300 pixels. I think the oldest like smartphones, or like the old iPhones, ran at 320 pixels in width. So 300 pixels usually is good, with like 10 pixels on each side of padding. It's a pretty comfortable margin or area to work with. But yeah, so we set the height, and we want a square, and we'll go ahead and set 400 pixels, and we'll give it a background of white. I don't mind the canvas being white, the SVG element, just because it's a smaller space in the center. It's not that abrasive. Alright, so let's see it. So the biggest thing that I want to set up first before anything else is the JavaScript, the main variables that we're going to be using. So in the settings, I had already loaded in the library, the GreenSock library. You can see here, GSAP min. It's version 3.4.2. And so what I want to do is I just want to collect all the circle elements and store them in an array. And so I'll have it as let circles equals document dot get elements by class name, and the class name is going to be circle. The other thing that I want is I want to create a timeline element. For those of you that aren't familiar with GreenSock, it's a really smooth animation platform. It provides you with a lot of tools, a lot of basic methods, attribute calling, properties, etc., that are pretty useful for doing animations. And apparently, I haven't tested it, and I'm not, as good at testing with cross-platform performance, or cross-browser performance. But apparently, GreenSock tends to cover all of that. It tends to make sure that everything's working properly on each browser that you're using. So pretty useful. So far, I've enjoyed using it. Anyways, we're just gonna go ahead and create a timeline element, timeline dot GSAP. No, sorry, that's wrong. GSAP dot timeline. I think. Do I just not know how to code anymore? That might be the case. Let's double check here. I guess it's the pressure of being behind the mic. GSAP.timeline. Yeah, I got it right. Alright, so this method, you could call in some defaults that you want for the timeline, but basically it's like the whole length of the animation is stored here, and then you could call on specific elements and what you want them to do in the animation through the timeline. It's just a cleaner way to work with it. It's a good habit to have, or so I've been told. I've read in the docs and the forums for GreenSock. But yeah, so we'll go with that, and then we'll have some constants because we're going to be doing a bit of math. So we do want to have a constant of the baseline. We'll just say colors, which is just an array of colors. For now, we can make it prettier, but for now, we'll just go red. Or keep that lowercase. Always want to keep our code clean, right? Red, blue, and green. The baseline colors are not my favorite, but gotta start somewhere, right? Okay, and then we want to use, did I just say colors equals colors? Jeez. Wow. Somebody come get me. Yeah, so keep it aligned. We'll go with pi. I am out of control right now. Holy. You know what it is? It's transitioning. Like, I've been doing a lot of Python. But, yeah, it's like transitioning back and forth. There's always kind of those, like, hiccups where you don't feel that comfortable. And again, I think it's the nerves. It's been over a year. Anyways, pi is going to be math.pi. We're just going to keep it easier for myself. And also, we want to set an angle. And that angle is going to equal... well, let me explain this. So, the main principle here is we have a certain amount of elements, right? We have, I think it's 8 circles that are going around in a loop. Let me go here and let me stop this thing from repeating. That way, should go up to the timeline, and you'll see here repeat is at -1, which means that it's going to keep repeating. So I'm just going to get rid of that. Now, if I run it, it's going to do it once, and it should stop. I am not doing a good job right now, but oh well. So we want to stop this animation from doing the second part where it goes back to x0, y0. So we'll just comment that out, and then we'll run the code, and it should work where it just goes to the pop-out point. So it stops here, and that's where we're at. Now, if you look here, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, so it's 8 circles around. Now, what if I want to have only 3 circles? I want to have 1 here, 1 here, and 1 here. Or if I want to have 4 circles. Well, I want this to be evenly distributed around the circle, right? I want the angle, the distance between them, to be equal. And so we're just going to be applying some math here. You could see it in the corner there. But we're going to be applying some math where we calculate the entire angle for the circle, which is 360 degrees. But if we do it in terms of radians, it's going to be equal to 2 pi. And then we're just going to divide that by the number of elements that we have, the number of menu item elements that we have, to get a consistent angle that's spread evenly. That way, we have something that we could work with, and it's very extendable. We could have as only 3 items, 2 items, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It doesn't matter. It's up to you. So it's a bit more flexible that way. And so the way that we want to do this is we want to go ahead and we want to say that the angle is equal to pi, 2 pi, because 2 pi is equal to the, I don't know, the degrees in a circle. I don't know if I use that term properly. That's probably redundant or confusing. Anyways, 2 pi, and we want to divide it by the number of circles that we have. So we go say circles.length. Alright, and for now I think that's it. If we need anything else, we'll go through it. But let's go ahead and we have our circles. Now, I want to go ahead and we have our 2 circles. What I'm going to do with this one is I'm actually going to give it the same class, because it does share a lot of the same properties. Even though it's the main circle, it does share a lot of the same properties. And we're going to we're actually going to go ahead and set it here. So we're going to go ahead and say timeline dot set, and we are going to be selecting the dot circles. We can do it this way, or dot circle class, or we can just go ahead and select all the elements in circles, so in the variable, and we have an object, and we're just going to be setting the properties. So we want to say that the CX position, the center of each circle, is going to be in the center of our canvas. So we know the canvas is 400 pixels by 400 pixels, so we want the center to be 200, and we want the center Y position to be 200. We want the radius of the circle to be, say, 50, and we want the fill. It already did an automatic fill of black. Great. So we can see it there popping up. Yeah, we'll say fill for now. One of my favorite colors, or kind of colors, is teal, like that mix between green and blue. And then we'll say the stroke width. I think it already, no, it doesn't have a standard. Yeah, GSAP, you have to use camel case. You cannot use snake case or any dashes or anything like that when you're calling the properties. Stroke width, we'll set it to, yeah, let's go 3 pixels. I don't need to use the elements just because inherently it's using pixels as the base. Stroke black. And always set your commas, otherwise you're going to break everything. Whoops, hit the mic. Yeah, so there we go. So this is a decent start. So this is the color of all the circles. We don't want that, but for now this is a good start. The other one is behind it. If I wanted to show you, I can go ahead and say GSAP or timeline.to, and I can select circles, and I want to take the second one, so I'm going to say from the array, we're going to take the second element, which is index 1, and I can go ahead and move it, let's say 100, and you'll see it move. Give it a second, and there it is. So we know we have two circles there. Alright, so the next step that we're going to take is we're going to add some more circles, and then we'll do the basic calculation for the angle, how they're going to spread out and move from the center. Okay, so we can potentially just add in a whole bunch of circles, new circle elements, to the SVG element by copying them and then appending them as a child, but in JavaScript. But for the sake of brevity and simplicity, we're going to hard code it. We're going to manually put them in. And there's no problem with that. I think I added in 3 there. Yeah, so now we have a total of 5 circle elements. One of them being the main button that will remain in the center, and 4 of them being the ones that will branch out. So how are they going to branch out? Well, first off, let's get rid of this. I know they're there. I don't need to check. I'm confident that they're there. I already tested with the first element. The other ones hold the same principle. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a for loop. And the principle behind this, again, like I explained before, is that angle. And so we're going to be looping through and providing a different angle that's a fraction of the whole to each circle element, to each circle item, we'll call them. Now, what I actually need, a key thing here, is I need a new constant. And this constant is going to be the R constant. Well, we already have an R, and that's for the radius of each circle. But we also need the R, the radius, for how far each circle element is going to move away from the center. If we look here, we have an R distance from here, the center, all the way to the element, and it's going around in a circle. And so we want to have that there, so we want to set it in one place so that it's consistent. And it's very clear. If we want to change it, it's going to apply to everything. So we go here. Now comes the fun part where we create a for loop. I will say, since I've been doing Python, I'll give Python credit in I like their for loops better. Don't want to say it, but it is the truth. Their for loops are kind of cleaner to use, like pretty intuitive. I'll give them credit with that. But yeah, 4, let I equal 0, I is less than circles dot length, pretty standard stuff. Now what I want here is I'm going to create a x variable, and for now we'll just set it to 0, and I'm going to have a y variable. And that's really it. That's the main thing there. What we're going to be doing now is trigonometry. If you remember sine, cosine, tangents, well, we're going to use triangles to calculate the x and y positions along this outer circle. So we have an x and y position here. We want to know the x and y position of all these circles that are moving around. Well, the one thing that we know is we can use the angle from the circle and the radius, the hypotenuse, in order to calculate the distance along the x-axis and the distance along the y-axis to get to where we want. So from here, there's an x distance and there's a y distance for the center of this circle. There's an x distance and a y distance from the center of this circle. And so we're going to be using math to do that. So what we go here is we say math. For the x, we're using cosine. If you remember, the cosine of angle theta is equal to the adjacent side of the triangle divided by the hypotenuse of the triangle. And so we're going to be using the cosine function. And we are passing in what angle? Well, we're passing in this angle. Right, we already calculated it. And we are multiplying it by, we're doing cross multiplication to to solve for the adjacent, the x distance. And so we're multiplying it by the hypotenuse. What's the hypotenuse? Well, we know the hypotenuse is r. Pretty straightforward, right? And we're going to be doing the same thing, except this time we're using the sine function, because the sine of angle theta is equal to the the opposite side of the triangle divided by the hypotenuse. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to have the angle, and we're going to multiply it by r. And in order for us to see everything, we want to use the timeline. So we're going to go as timeline 2, and we want to use the circles, and we want to say that the x position is going to equal x and the y position is going to equal y. Should work perfect. Wait, what happened? Well, what happened here is that we didn't select the individual elements. I'm sure many of you caught that. So we need to select each element and do that. Alright, now it just did it one after the other, but they all moved in the same position. Well, the issue here is if we look at the angle doesn't change at all based on what element we're working with. And so we want to go ahead through the process and say angle multiplied by I, angle multiplied by I. And now we're getting this circle. It's not bad, right? Yeah, it's not bad. And the whole principle here is, if we think about it, I to start is 0. So the first element is going to go from the center, and it's going to go with the cosine of theta multiplied by I. So we know it's 0. So it's the cosine of 0. Well, that equals 1. So it's going to equal the radius. So it's going to equal the r and just go all the way out. And the y, the sine of 0 is 0. So it's not going to move anywhere. And the next one, you're going to get that angle, and the next one, and the next one, and the next one. Two main points here. First thing is, we want the center. Remember, we want this element here, circle center, to be in the middle. Well, how do we identify it? How do we know the difference? Well, we can go ahead here and we could set the fill to colors, or it's in caps. Gotta remember that. Colors, element I. Now I got this one. Why? Because there's so many elements, but I only have 3 colors. So for the sake of this, we'll go ahead and add another one, and we'll say purple. I want the 4 items to have the different colors, and then I want the center to have the original color. Well, here's the thing. Alright, well, what can we do? Well, we can just go ahead and say I plus 1. Just skip the first element, because the first element in the array is the center item. So we want to stay there. Okay, great, but now we're missing a slot. Well, then we go ahead and we go to the slot and we say, hey, we actually, when we're calculating the angle, we don't want to use circle.length. We want to use one less than that. One less than that when we're calculating the angle, so that when we get it, we're only going to calculate for 4. And then boom, we have 4. But the last thing, I'm not sure if you're noticing this, the last thing is, I don't want this to be behind everything else. Do you see how that purple kind of went over it? I don't want that. And so what needs to happen is, this needs to be, this needs to actually be the last element. Because if you're familiar with how the DOM works, in a stack, in a list of elements, the last element is the one that sits on top of all the others, unless you specify it using the z-index property. The last element in the stack is going to be the one that sits on top. So we want this to be sitting on top. However, now it does change the environment where this becomes the color. And so what we're going to be doing is we are going to be setting up this so that we're going to circles dot length -1. We're not doing the last element. We're not going to be doing the last element. Did I get this wrong? Well, first off, I don't like this radius, to be honest. It's kind of tripping me out how it keeps going over, or it's like just touching the edge. This is more familiar, it's more comfortable. Yeah, so we're going to be going here, and we want to loop through all of them, but we don't want to touch the last one. So this time, instead of doing this, we want it to be circles.I. So the first element is fine for you to work with, but we don't want to touch the last one. And you could see here how it sits in the middle and it doesn't change. It sits in the middle and it doesn't change. Alright, so now we have our circles. Great. So the last thing that we need to do is we just need to do the pop-out effect. The pop-out effect. And just to be clear, if we look at this and we want to add another circle, the color won't be set up. But now we're going to have 5. You'll see them go around. It works evenly. If I delete 2 circles, we'll end up with 3. So it's not bad. It's not bad at all. The idea here, though, is, again, it's calculating the angle, and then it's dividing that angle equally amongst the number of circle item elements. So yeah, what we have left is we are going to be animating it to get the effect that we want with that pop out. Expands, and then it all sinks in. Just run it one more time. It expands, expands out, and sinks in. Alright, so we can now go through and just focus on the GSAP animations. So when we look here in the loop, we're animating each element, each circle item individually. So on this first loop, we're going to be animating the first element. Second loop, we're going to animate that. And that results in this sequenced approach. You can change that by adjusting the position, the start positions for each animation item in the timeline, but we're not going to do that. Right now we want that effect of the staggered effect where each of them is doing that. But we can set properties, which I haven't mentioned before or until now. We can set properties like the duration. So let's say we want this to be super long. We can do that. 5 seconds. Watch it take forever. Right? We can do that. For the sake of this, we won't. We're only going to go with 0.25 seconds. We want it to be a quick stagger. You know, boom, 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 and we're done with that. All right. And the other thing that I want to mention is for the record, we can actually run this calculation directly in here. I'm just not doing it, just so that it stays a bit cleaner. We're able to separate these things into individual steps. But yeah, you can compound this stuff to shorten the length of your code, the lines of code that you're writing. So after we've done this animation, I want the next step in the animation to be the whole bloop, like the pop out expanding effect. If you remember here, run it again, they all explode in size together. So yeah, I want to set that up, but I do want to highlight this. This is the ease. If you think about how to do the animation styling, and for this one we could do a power 1, and we'll go with power 1 in, and you'll see it's a bit more aggressive with how it forces its way out. After they've already expanded, we want to go ahead and go timeline 2, so we want to continue the progression. We're going to select all the circles all together, and then we're going to have them scale in size. And so we'll say maybe scale to 1.1 in size, yeah, so that it pops in and then it's going to pop out. But we scale it to 1.1, and then we want the ease this time to be kind of elastic, like it's popping. Always you have to use the ease as a string. Elastic, and we want it to be elastic, maybe out. Yeah, it's not bad. Yeah, elastic out, and the duration, maybe we'll say 0.5. So we have this going on, and the last step, now we're going to tweak this obviously, but the last step is we want to go and we want to select all the circles. Oh, and for the record, when you do this, the timeline.2, you don't have to end this like with a semicolon. You could actually stack them and just say timeline dot, like you just say dot 2 again. So okay, this is the next step. We could select the circles again, and this time what we want them to do is I don't know if I like the way that I arranged that, but have to take it as is, I suppose, for now. Yeah, what we want it to do is we're going to go ahead and have all of them go back to their original position. So we'll set the X to 0 and the Y to 0. And then they'll all come back in. But we do want this to be, somewhat dramatic. And so when we set the styling, if we look here, maybe we'll get a hint as to what it was. I don't want to look at the code. I don't want to cheat. But we look at it, it expands out, and then it actually bounces. So it's using an elastic ease as well. So elastic out for the position. Nope, that's not it. Maybe it's an in. And so you're just kind of playing around to get the, yeah, that was it in terms of the styling, but the duration was a bit, I don't know, maybe we need to set it to 2 just to see it go slowly. So there is an issue that I'm noticing. If you look at the transforms, they're not taking place from the center. They're moving from, again, that top left-hand corner, that 0, 0 position. So in the set, we actually want to go ahead and set the transform origin. This is something that you'll do fairly often. Origin, and we're going to set it to, let's get this right, 50% in the x direction and 50% in the y direction. So 50% of the element and 50% of the element. So we should get it in the dead center. And that way, when it does the scaling, it's going to take place from the center of the element. And now we're getting somewhat, of the effect that we're looking for. So we can go ahead and, if we want to go to the timeline, I didn't set it, but I can set it here. And just go to the repeat so that I can keep looking at it and say -1. And this thing should keep repeating now. And repeat delay, and we'll say 1 second. So now we have a problem here. We don't want this middle element to be doing anything, right? We want it to stay the same because we're selecting all the circles. So here, I wonder if Python, sorry, like I know Python you could select all the elements except for. Let's test that out and see if you could do that. If you go ahead and create an array and say select elements 1, 2, 3, I doubt that would work. That definitely did not work. Python's looking more intuitive. Gotta be honest here. The other thing that we can do is we could just set a class. If we go here and we say yeah, we could set a class for all of these and just call them item and apply that. I'm not the biggest fan of working in CodePen, to be honest. I prefer my own IDE. I usually use VS Code. But yeah, and then if we go here and we, instead of item, we use a string and we just say dot item. Sorry, instead of circles, the element, we just use a string and say, and use that as a selector. That GSAP will automatically do it for you, dot item. Look at these guys. They're a lot bigger. And so the issue here is that we need to set the scale back. We need to set the scale back to 1. And we can put the bounce back to 1 second for the duration. But that's basically it, guys. Inherently, that's how you would go ahead and build this, this animation. And if you want to tweak it, let's say, for example, you have these 3 elements, and you don't want this to start here. You kind of want it to be look a bit more centered from your point of view. Well, you could go ahead and say it becomes the angle multiplied by I, and then you can go ahead and add, just because you want to rotate it from its initial position. And because it's going to be, I want the red element to be starting here. Yeah, I want the first element to be starting here in the middle. Well, I want to rotate it counterclockwise, so I'm going to subtract an angle so that it rotates counterclockwise from its original position. And it's going to be, if I'm not mistaken, it will be pi, and it will be divided by 2. I think that would be it. Did I get that wrong? I didn't. If you could see the X, it's still sitting in the center. So I just have to apply that to both sides. Yeah. So there it is. There's something a little off. Yeah, something a little bit off. Wonder what that is. I'm going to stop the I'm going to stop all of this and see what happens. So at this point in time, it's centered. When I add this step into it, what do I get? This is the scaling, 1.1. Yeah, perhaps I need to establish the transform origin here. I'm not sure why I would need to do that, but I'm not an expert in GSAP. You know, we're just going through it together. Transform origin, and we'll say 50% and 50%, and hopefully this will address it because it's still scaling in. There it is. Now it's scaling from the center, and so hopefully this will have no issue as well. Hopefully. Nice. That's pretty clean. That's pretty clean. Yeah. So there you have it. So you could play with this, and obviously I did power 4 here, elastic. You could look at the GSAP documents, but ultimately it's the same thing that's taking place. It's the same thing that's taking. If you look here, let's break down this code. You could see 2 pi. I didn't set an angle constant. I just set the pi constant. So to keep my code cleaner, it would make more sense if I just took this and put it here. right, up in one place, which is what we did. So naturally, I'm already making improvements as we go along, just to keep the code cleaner. It depends. I don't want, you don't want repetition, and to repeat circles.length, it leaves room for error. Look at the timing, all of that, and again, all of the icons. The icons came from, I believe it was Font Awesome. I think that's what it was. Like, they usually have like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all of those like generic brand icons. So I just took some stuff like for elements, but the same principle applies, and GSAP works the exact same way on actual other DOM elements like divs, buttons, etc. So it's a pretty cool library to get used to. I'm still learning it. I'm still trying to do some cool stuff with it, but ultimately, this is the idea. So yeah, if you liked it, if you're interested in more, please make sure to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching. I'll try and be more consistent and keep going.